So let's jump into 2 Chronicles 7. You've heard this passage before. It's a really good one to anchor into. God is speaking. He says this: if my people, that would be us, if my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. Now their eyes, or my eyes rather, will be open and my ears attentive to the prayer that is made in this place. I've got 2 words for you this morning. This is going to be the whole message pretty much. Keep praying. Keep praying. I can think of nothing that attunes our spirits to the Spirit of the Lord more than constant, humble, faithful prayer. Constant, humble, faithful prayer. I hope that defines your life. If it doesn't, let's start now. Let's make 2021 a year of constant prayer. And John Scott already mentioned this, and I'll mention it again. We have an opportunity to join together in a day of prayer and fasting this Wednesday, okay? And like John Scott said, we're not going to have gatherings, at least not in the traditional sense. There will be a couple of Facebook Live gatherings, me and a couple of our different shepherds at noon, 12:30. I can't remember the time. It's all in there on the website. But we're going to do a couple of Facebook Live. But really, whether you join those or not, I want to invite you to pray. There is a lot to pray about. And I was just stirred a couple of weeks ago in my heart because of some of the individuals that I see that need prayer among our flock. And some of them are friends of mine that are not part of this flock. But I thought of guys like Chris and William and Rick and Kevin, guys that I want to pray for in a special way. And you have people like that on your heart. Anyway, we're going to have a prayer list available. Just go to that part of the website, and you'll see all the information about on the Get Hungry part of our website. It's a banner there on the front page to join in and pray on this day in a special way Wednesday. This is nothing new to us. We've done it several times. If you are new to fasting, we even have resources there, a link there on fasting for beginners. What I can tell you about fasting, if you have never done it before, is it is really part of, let's say, mainstream discipleship. Unfortunately, these days, it's kind of not so mainstream, but you go to first century discipleship, what it looks like to follow God. Paul fasted. John the Baptist fasted. I mean, he had that whole locust and honey fast going on, and his disciples were fasters. We find that. Jesus fasted, launched his ministry with a fast. The leaders of the church in Antioch, before they made a big decision to send Paul and Silas out, Acts chapter 13, they fasted. So it really is something that we should mainstream. Prayer and fasting for special things, for great needs. So we're going to do this Wednesday, and I hope that you will join us. Once upon a time, a duck waddled into a farm store, walked up to the owner of the store and said, "Sir, do you have any duck feed?" The owner of the store said, "No, I'm sorry, we don't carry duck feed. There's just not much of a need for it around here." And so the duck waddled out the door and went home. The next day, the same duck waddled back into that farm store, walked up to the owner and asked the same question, "Sir, do you have any duck feed?" The owner of that store said, "No, I don't have any duck feed. I'm sorry, still don't have that. The duck waddled home. The next day, yes, guess what? The duck waddled back into the farm store, walked up to the owner of the store and said, "Do you have any duck feed?" And the owner, at this point, getting a little red in the face, replied, "I have told you twice already, this farm store does not have duck feed, and we are not going to carry duck feed. There's not enough of a need for this. If you ask me again, I will nail your feet to the floor." The duck turned around, left. The following day, the duck walked into the farm store again and said, "Sir, do you have any nails?" "No," the owner replied. Then the duck said, "Do you have any duck feed?" And there's something there about prayer, I think. That is a dogged and determined and diligent duck. And prayer should be something dogged and determined and diligent. It should be a grabbing on to God. Whether you have a special dramatic need, you have a friend who's dying, or you have a loved one who has passed away and you're praying for comfort, or just your regular "give us this day our daily bread," because your life depends on God. And prayer is a recognition. Whether it is smooth sailing or choppy seas, you depend on God. And so you come to the Father in prayer. But we get discouraged sometimes. And we lose focus because we don't see results sometimes, or we don't get the answers that we want sometimes. But still, 1 Thessalonians 5:17, still we are to pray without ceasing. Amen? Would you say that with me? Pray without ceasing. We can do better. Pray without ceasing. Never stop praying. Jesus told a story about this one time in Luke chapter 18. It is the story of a desperate widow lady who refused to quit asking, who needed help, and continued to knock on that door until she got the help she needed. And here's the setup to the parable. Here's the point of the parable. Jesus, in Luke 18:1, one day Jesus told his disciples a story to show that they should always pray and never give up. Two important facts that Jesus lays out right here before he even tells this parable. One, we don't pray enough. We just don't. We should always pray. But we forget to pray. We may go for days without praying. I hope not. I hope that's not you, but we don't pray enough. The second thing, we get discouraged. We get discouraged. We lose heart when we don't see results. He says those two things right at the top. I mean, even people who do pray, they don't pray enough. They're not always praying. And no one in history had a greater appreciation for what happens when we pray. No one appreciated that more than this guy, than Jesus. No one understood how the power and the providence of God are unleashed in a special way when God's children pray. And so he comes along and he says, "Disciples, you don't pray enough. And you get discouraged. Instead of praying when we don't see the results that we would like to see, what happens is we lose heart. We tap out. And so the story is going to address these two issues that disciples tend to have by lifting up our vision to God at the end of the story and by understanding the importance of prayer. Now, before we get into the story, we are going to read the story, but I just want to tell you a little bit about the protagonist of the story, the hero of this story, because this is an unusual hero. She is a poor widow. Now, as protagonists go, certainly an unusual choice. I think about the protagonists in the films that are on your streaming service, or some days at the movie theater when those come back, But when Hollywood dreams up a plot line, I mean, our protagonists are often, heroes or superheroes or soldiers or warriors. Almost always in the stories that Hollywood tells, the protagonist is attractive and charming. A widow, not so much today. So if you are a widow, forgive me here. This is a first century caricature. Not so much today, but a widow in Jesus' time was the epitome of somebody helpless and poor and without connections, essentially. A nobody. Personification of defenselessness, vulnerability, a miserable life. The widow lived in a state of daily dependence on the pity, on the charity of others. Like, I could be off on this. Maybe, speculating here, if Jesus were telling this story today to us, maybe instead of this caricature, maybe he would use an old homeless woman in downtown Dallas, clothed in rags, pushing a squeaky shopping cart along the sidewalk, holding the sum total of her worldly possessions. It's the same feeling. A nobody in the eyes of the world. A person without resources. And so Jesus thinks his disciples need to hear this story. Here we go. Verse 2. He said, "In a certain city, there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected man. And there was a widow in that city who kept coming to him and saying, 'Give me justice against my adversary.' For a while he refused, but afterward he said to himself, 'Though I neither fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice, so that she will not beat me down by her continual coming.' And the Lord said, 'Hear what the unrighteous judge says.'" The unrighteous judge. "And will not God give justice to his elect who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?" So there she is, the unusual protagonist of the story, down and out, desperate, You feel the tension in that story? I mean, I don't know. Some people do. Many people do. Some of our neighbors do. I don't know what it's like to live in a constant battle for survival. I don't know what it's like to wonder where the next meal is going to come from or how you're going to pay the rent next. Some of you know this. I don't know what her life was like to be in a daily struggle where your life is defined by scarcity. But there's more to her story, and it's not good. Jesus says, this poor lady has an enemy. She has an adversary. By the way, that word adversary, that's a word we're going to hear used for Satan in the Bible as well. In fact, that's the name. Satan is adversary. That's what that name means. But anyway, we don't get the details of what this scoundrel, of what this enemy of hers was doing to her, but we know that she's suffering at the hands of somebody. And the implication in this, again, back to what a widow represented in the first century in that part of the world, the implication is that she was a nobody and that she had nobody to help her. She didn't have a son to take up her cause. She didn't have a husband to take up her cause. She didn't have family members to stick up for her, to protect her, to stand in the gap, to advocate on her behalf. I mean, if she had been well connected, if she had been a Jackie Onassis sort of widow, she could have pulled a few strings. She could have found some leverage to force her adversary to acquiesce, to force the judge to hear her. I mean, even with some resources, maybe she could have greased the wheels of justice a little bit, bribe the judge, get what she needed. But she had no options available except this person, this magistrate. She's on her own. All she can do is talk to this guy. And it gets even worse. He's not a good guy. This is not a good judge, right? I mean, there in verse 2, Jesus says, he doesn't fear God. He doesn't fear people. He doesn't care. He doesn't care what the neighbors think about the job he's doing. He doesn't care what God thinks. He doesn't have a higher calling. He doesn't feel responsible to great, principles of virtue and justice so that he will be held accountable to God someday. He doesn't care about that stuff. Now, he is a somebody in the community. He has power. People come to him who need things from him. And speculating again, maybe he's used to getting some favors and some kickbacks. Maybe those are the people that he does listen to, that he doesn't send away. Ones who can help him out. Ones who can help him pay for that new pool that he's putting in the backyard. Or that lake house that he wants to buy. Anyway, without other recourse, all she can do is take her case to this fellow. And his response, quit wasting my time, old woman. I mean, normally, that would be it. The judge has spoken. Case dismissed. Go away. Leave my courtroom, but not for her. She devised a plan. It is so simple. It is so elegant. It involved simply asking that magistrate over and over and over and over and over again to hear her case until he finally gave in and heard her case. You could almost say her plan was to nag. I think the positive way of putting that might be persistently ask. Nag, persistently ask. She would wear him out. She would break down his defenses. She would pester him until he finally gave in. And Jesus says in verse 3, she kept coming to him saying, there's this refrain, give me justice against my adversary. Over and over she said that. And we're left to imagine, aren't we? What did that look like? I wonder, was she waiting outside his front gate in the morning when he walked out to walk the kids to school? Give me justice. I beg you, give me justice. I wonder if when he got to the office, she was the one sitting there in the waiting room. It's me again. Give me justice. I wonder if when he took his wife out on date night to the local Chili's or whatever the iteration of that was in first century Jerusalem, falafels are us, whatever, I don't know. I wonder if she went to the table and got on her knees and begged him, please, hear my case. I have no other option. She kept asking, that's what we know. She shadowed this guy day in and day out. And it worked. It worked. Her plan, he couldn't take it anymore. One day he just threw up his arms and said, fine. Justice dispensed. Your case has been heard. You win. You get what you need. Now leave me alone. And that's the story. That's the story he tells. I imagine the disciples were thinking, aha, now we get it. This teaching about prayer is really starting to make sense. I'm a nobody. God is a somebody. I don't matter to God. He's eternal. He's powerful. He's got better things to do than to listen to me, than to care about my petty concerns. He has a universe to run. So I get it, Jesus. You've made your point. I am the nobody. I'm the old widow. I am powerless. My voice doesn't get heard. So God is just so busy. If I'm going to win God over, I got to nag. I got to wear God out. Lesson learned, Jesus. You guys know that's not the point of the story. Because after he tells the story, he has something very different than that to say. He interrupts that thinking by saying, verse 6, look, that judge who heard the widow's cry, that was an unjust judge. That was a corrupt judge. So why would we question that the just judge, the uncorrupt and uncorruptible, pure and righteous, holy God of the universe, why would we question whether or not he will dispense justice? And by the way, you're not a nobody, Jesus says. You're a somebody to God. Verse 7. Listen closely to what Jesus says. Will not God give justice to his elect who cry to him day and night? Sister and brother, who are you to God? You're special to God. You matter to God. You're not an annoyance to God. Jesus says you are part of the eklektos, the select or chosen or interesting. You can actually translate that word favorite. You're somebody who matters, somebody who God sees, somebody who God cares about. You matter to God. Your concerns and struggles and problems, even the little things, your daily bread, they matter to God. It doesn't mean that God is going to answer every prayer you pray with the answer you think best. Don't know if you know this. He's all-knowing and all-wise. I can speak for myself. I know I'm not. So He's going to answer with His best, not my version of best. Okay? That's part of what it means to be faithful, to trust in Him, to be found with faith when the Son of God returns. It doesn't mean God is going to answer according to my timetable, but it means I matter to God. And He hears my prayer. And He cares. He is not detached. He is not unjust. He is not uncaring, someone that needs to be pestered for results. By the way, on this, you are not a nobody. This is a common theme when Jesus teaches about prayer. I don't know if you noticed this in the New Testament. It's not only recognizing who God is, hallowed be thy name. It's not only recognizing who God is, it's recognizing your standing before God. When His disciples, Matthew 7, say, Lord, teach us how to pray, we see that when you pray, it's different. We see the power of God unleashed when you teach us how to pray. The first two words Jesus utters in that modeled prayer are, Our Father. Matthew 7, verse 11, Our Father. It's a recognition of who God is and who we are. Precious sons and daughters of God. Or, in our passage today, the elect of God. And so there is just one takeaway this morning. I don't have a complicated formula for you about prayer. I just have the point that Jesus shares this morning. Remember what He told. I'm going to tell you a story. Here's the point of the story. Remember this? Luke chapter 18, verse 1, that we should always pray and never give up. That's what you need to hear today. That's what you need to hear as you finish this year, 2020. Always pray, never give up. And as we move into a new year, always pray and never give up. You can turn prayer requests in by church teams. If you don't know what that is, I think most of our members do know what that is. If you don't know what that is, you can turn them in. Just shoot me an email or one of our elders an email. We want to make sure that we get that in this constantly updated prayer list so that we can have that available as this body of believers is praying on our day of prayer and fasting this Wednesday. That's not the only time we pray, but it will be a special time of bringing things before the throne of God together. So please submit those. If you've got something that you need your friends and family here to pray about, submit that. Maybe you just have something this morning that you need for us to pray over, and we would love to do that. Maybe this morning it's just time to cross the line of faith. Surrender your life to Jesus. Be baptized into Christ.